Welcome back, amazing people. Today's episode of our podcast is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, Picmonic. I'm thrilled to share with you why I believe in this incredible learning platform and how it can revolutionize the way you study. So what is Picmonic? Well, Picmonic is an innovative educational tool that combines visual storytelling with mnemonic techniques to help you retain information faster and more effectively than ever before. As the host of this podcast, I've had the chance to dive deep into Picmonic and explore its vast library of content. Let me tell you, it's mind-blowing. They cover a wide range of subjects from medical scientists to nursing, pharmacy, and beyond. It's like having a personal tutor right at your very fingertips. What sets Picmonic apart is their unique approach to learning. They've leveraged the power of visuals and storytelling to create engaging mnemonic stories that make it easier for your brain to remember critical facts and concepts. I've personally found their visual cues to be incredibly helpful in retaining information long-term. But here's the best part. As a listener of our podcast, you can now get a special discount by using my affiliate code Norman, all lowercase, Norman. You will receive a fantastic 20% off your Picmonic subscription. Just visit Picmonic, PICMONIC.com and enter the code Norman, Norman, at checkout to start unlocking the full potential of your learning journey. Whether you're a student, a healthcare professional, or someone just passionate about expanding their knowledge, Picmonic is your secret weapon. They've helped countless other individuals ace exams, improve their understanding of complex topics, and gain the confidence they need to excel in their careers. So join me on this incredible learning adventure with Picmonic. Remember, use our affiliate code Norman to save 20% off your subscription. Once again, that's picmonic.com, and at checkout, enter the code Norman for your exclusive discount. All right, on to the show. Welcome back to another episode of Pillow Talk Podcast. Again, we're here to try to bridge the gap between healthcare, entrepreneurship, culture, mindset, and creativity. And today I have an very esteemed guest, Graham Walker. He is the founder of MDCalc. He is an emergency medicine physician for Kaiser Permanente and also helps with technology and innovation for that group as well. Graham, would you like to add anything to that?
No, yeah, that's me. Thanks for having me, Norman. Yeah, there's a lot of gaps that you're trying to bridge with this podcast.
A lot. Yeah, it's a lot. But yeah, some of the topics that we'd like to hit on today is just kind of how we're using technology and AI and EHR integrations into like just generally technology and healthcare, bridging that gap, as well as just how you're an emergency medicine physician and you started learning how to code, built MDCalc. How was that journey, building that into what it is today. Yeah. And then also how healthcare has changed, how emergency medicine has changed post-COVID, during COVID, and then just seeing the healthcare professions, how medicine has moved and how people are viewing it versus how maybe people in healthcare are seeing that now.
Yeah. All right. Sounds great, Norman. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for letting me use your off day again. I know we were discussing that before. So yeah, with that, let's start off the first discussion with how did you come to build MDCalc? Like, what was the purpose of it? Like, what got you on that journey to want to learn how to code and build out the MDCalc? Or let's start with what is MDCalc?
Yeah. So, if your viewers don't know MDCalc, should they even be viewing or listening?
Should they be listening, right?
Come on. So MDCalc is a medical kind of calculations and algorithms scores platform to make it easy for physicians and other clinicians and pharmacists to kind of calculate information that they need to take better care of patients. So there are lots of scores and recommendations in the medical literature. There's like tens of thousands of papers that come out every day. And we take the best of them, we review them, make sure they're high quality. We take the best of them, and ones that are kind of actionable, we try to turn them into digital tools so then they can be easily used by clinicians seeing patients. They tend to be most applicable when there's like one specific clinical question that the doctor has for a patient. So this isn't like, oh, my patient has chest pain, what could be the causes? This is, oh, I know my patient has pneumonia. Should I admit them to the hospital, or would it be safe for them to go home with some antibiotics, something like that?
So just giving a more clear outline and algorithmic way of parsing through those clinical decision making, right?
Yeah, and it's all, it's all based on evidence. So these are all
Yeah.
trials with usually thousands of people in them. And so it's allowing the clinician to use evidence to make what I would think to be more evidence-based and better decisions. Often a clinician's gestalt is usually really good for medical decision making, but when sometimes we're not sure. Sometimes somebody has a couple risk factors, but they look really well and their vital signs are okay. Should I do this or should I do that? And this kind of can be a helpful tiebreaker if you don't know what to do.
Absolutely. And with that, so the purpose of it was to enable physicians and just clinicians in general to make better decisions based on evidence, right? So
that's the purpose now. The original purpose was like, I thought it was silly that the residents and attendings when I was in med school, that they were asking me parts of these scores and asking me, like, they expected me to have memorized all of this stuff. And I thought, well, that's weird. Why would I memorize all of these? There's lots of things to memorize in medicine.
Absolutely.
But why would I need to memorize this particular little thing? This is a perfect thing that could be looked up. Back in med school, when I was in med school in 2005, Norman, we carried around like little 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper or note cards. And like we had these tiny little reference books in like 7 or 8 point font so that they would be small enough to fit in our white coat pockets. And they would have the scores listed in there, or they'd have like, a list of things to order if somebody has abdominal pain, whatever. And I thought, wow, that's crazy that all of this stuff, either you need to carry it on you or you're expected to memorize this stuff when, back in 2005, like there was the internet there, I think the iPhone came out in 2006, maybe.
I think
so. There were Palm Pilots. There were digital tools. There were computers. So it seemed, and there was the internet. So it seemed crazy to me that people were still thinking, "Oh, we should memorize this stuff." There's definite stuff you need to memorize, especially in emergency medicine. There's stuff that you do not have time to look up, but there's plenty of stuff that should be looked up because it's a waste of your brain cells to memorize.
Right. That taking out a lot of the lower level memorization, whereas things that you can reserve brain power and computing power for the higher complex, maybe more complex disease states, more complex patients, right? Gotcha.
And stuff that you should look up. If there's a drug you prescribe 4 times a year, you shouldn't be like, yeah, I'm pretty sure the dose is 100 milligrams BID. You should look that up. We should give people tools to make it easy for them to look that up, but you shouldn't rely on something that you do infrequently when you're taking care of patients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just nice to know that you have something that's made by other clinicians that takes into account evidence-based medicine or evidence, but then you can use it as a backup, like to just, like everything that you learned in medical school, pharmacy school, nursing school, XYZ, knowing that there's something in the background that can be your safeguard in case you need something, right? Yeah. And I mean, personally, having just graduated pharmacy school and, a year ago or a year and a half ago, like I was using it all during rotations, calculating Chad Bass score, calculating dosing for banks and things like that, trough dosing. So yeah, no, definitely like it's been crazy to see the widespread adoption of something that you created. So yeah. And it's funny because during rotations, right, I wasn't like going around boasting, oh yeah, I know the founder of MDCalc, but like just seeing my friends use it, and I'm like, wow, like I just thought of you whenever I would use it or whenever I see my friends using it, and I was like, wow, this was made by a clinician, right? And it's just inspiring to see. So again, So yeah, how did you? So you had the idea like, oh yeah, we don't need to memorize all this, right?
Yeah.
How did you go about like you didn't just know how to code like when you were an emergency medicine physician, right?
I mean, no. So the internet really started to take off when I was in high school. So I made my first web page. I kind of taught myself how to make a web page. My first web page was on GeoCities for my repertory theater group in high school. Yeah. And then I messed around a little bit more with it in college. but not a ton more. I majored in social policy, like I was not a CS person at all. It
Mm.
was just kind of all self-taught. And really the beauty of the web is you can view source and view anything, view how anybody made any web page, which is really cool.
Mm.
And then in med school, I started messing around. I got into blogging. I was one of the first medical bloggers. Now it's like not even that big a deal, but there were maybe 20 or 30 of us. I was a med student and then other physicians. We were blogging and discussing. I'm still friends with a lot of those people. So I made a blog for myself.
Yeah.
It was called Over My Med Body. And it was just kind of my journey through medical school.
That's a beautiful name.
Talking about dissecting my first cadaver, working in the hospital, the death of my first patient, all of these experiences that I knew I'd only have once. So I made a web page to host all of that. And then my brain has always just been interested in solving problems or like things that are extremely inefficient, really just get under my skin for some reason.
Yeah.
Which can be challenging working in the US healthcare system. But when it's something fixable, that's like, oh, I could fix that. And so I had that same idea. Well, this is really inefficient. That you're asking medical students to memorize these esoteric scores. Hey, why don't I fix that? And there were a couple other places that had documented a few scores, but no place that had kind of brought all of them together. And I thought, oh, why don't I just fix this? and so I just programmed it on kind of in my limited free time, nights and weekends during med school.
But isn't that just beautiful? Because what you just described is like the core of entrepreneurship. Like you saw a problem in your industry, in your field, or in your daily workflow.
Yeah.
And you saw that problem and you said, hey, either I know the skills to solve that problem, or I will have the determination to learn the skills in order to build something that will solve that problem. And then you spent your nights, as you just said, the nights and weekends, right? Your free time, which is precious, right? Especially in medicine, where you don't get a lot of free time.
It's great that I'm an introvert.
Right, that too, right?
Because if I prefer to like go out to bars and stuff, I'm sure MDCalc never would have happened.
And see, that's the problem for me as an extrovert. I'm getting hit up by people all the time. Like, hey, let's go out, or hey, let's go eat, grab dinner, or catch up. And as an extrovert, it's really hard to, I think, not diversify my time, to protect my energy, protect my time, because I'm a people pleaser. I naturally want.
Well, yeah, you naturally want to spend time with other people. I naturally want to be by myself on my computer.
Right. Yeah. But just going back on topic. So you definitely had more time and just you wanted to spend that energy building that, and because naturally as an introvert. So then what was it like in those first few months, or first few weeks, or how did that
start? Luckily, I was also interested in web design, like the design and the UI portion of it. And this is like such a dumb example, but it's just how my brain really loves things to be hyper efficient. On many web forms, you have to click a submit button to like have the form process. And I hated that. That always bugged me. I was like, well, the data's already there. Just run the calculation for me. And so it's just that, take out one little click. So I ended up like programming the thing so it would work with JavaScript, so it wouldn't actually need to talk to a server to do the calculation. It would just run it automatically. And because I had an interest in web design and Google was really starting to take off at that time.
Oh yeah.
I also had an interest in SEO, search engine optimization.
Yep.
And now there are people whose whole career is SEO, but at the time it was much simpler. It was just like, oh, well, build your web page with these like keywords. 5 or 10 rules.
Yeah.
And then Google will automatically put it at the top. And so, the first few months, I just kind of released it and had a little page where people could email me if they have questions or something like that. And then it just kind of took off naturally. Google started to rank it high. And then when people would search for those scores or those terms, I would be like the only link. And so then people just started to get used to it, get to know the website, and it's all been organic from there.
Wow. So then did you so it was just you on the team building this, right?
Oh yeah. I built the whole thing from 2005 until 2011 or 2012. And it wasn't until then that it really turned into like a business, and we had additional people to help with everything. Let me just pause real fast, Norman. My cat is meowing.
Yeah, no problem. I'll press pause. Yeah, so you were just saying?
Oh, so what was I saying? So
you were turning into a business. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So in 2012, in 2011, I had finished residency, and my now business partner, Joe Habush, who we went to residency together, he's also an emergency physician. He said, "Hey, I think you have something really valuable here." And I said, "Oh, okay." I'm not, clearly he's the business person, I'm not. And I had Google Ads on the site, and he said, "Oh, I think it could, be a big force for good, and I think it could be turned into a business." And so I said, as long as we can keep it freely available to people, because that's really what drives me, is like the ability to have it grow and help more people, and add more tools and stuff like that. He said, "Yeah, I think we can make that work." And so we've been business partners since 2011.
Right. And it's grown so much since then, right? Because now you're saying that it's being integrated into EHRs. Is that right?
Yeah. We've started an EHR integration. If you're interested, you can go to ehr.mdcalc.com, and we've got a form that you can
subtle plug.
To talk to hospitals about integrating it. But yeah, I mean, that's been the holy grail, is making it so that you don't have to go back and forth between the EHR, which kind of houses the data, the patient's sodium level or their creatinine or whatever, and go to the web page or to the app or whatever, to just have them talk automatically to each other.
Just reducing the, what is it called? The system switching fatigue. I know there's a better terminology for it, but reducing that burden where you're going from like, Epic, and then you're switching over to something you use specifically just for dosing, or you use MDCalc. We see this in independent pharmacy too, which is kind of like my background, where we have like a software for every single service, for compounding, for marketing, for the PMS, the pharmacy management system. And it just gets exhausting, like having to switch back and forth. And then this as an emergency medicine physician, all the little alerts and notifications, and just over fatiguing everyone in the healthcare system, right?
And you also get less, there's a lower risk of error transcription, like, or just typos, right? You think you typed 1.7 and you typed, 2.7 or something like that. Or you thought it said 0.7 and it said 3.9, whatever it is, because you looked at the wrong row of the results. Yeah, I think those are extremely important, to have everything sitting in one system, so it's easier to access, for sure.
What has been the most difficult part? Because I know from what I hear, and like me knowing what I know, EHR integration is never easy, especially working with Epic and the other one, the big two, I forget. But
Cerner and Allscripts.
Cerner and Allscripts. Yeah. How has that experience been? Like, if you can speak on that?
Well, I mean, there are more and more standards across EHRs, which is really critical to making this work. Which has helped a lot. There's a standard called FHIR, NHL7. So there are standards that make it easier to say, okay, this blood pressure in this system is the same as the blood pressure that we need for this particular score. So it's getting better, but certainly the fact that there are not federal standards about where data should be stored, definitions for particular data elements, makes it so that hospitals have all had to just kind of decide that. Often maybe they'll take the EHR vendor's recommendation. Epic says you typically want to store this data here. But some hospitals may have good reasons to store it other places. And so then it is a little bit of work of translating that data from the hospital to the actual data point that we need in MDCalc. For example, if we're taking a heart rate, if a score calls for a heart rate, well, what does that specifically mean? Do you mean, is it just the most recent heart rate? Is it their triage heart rate when they first showed up in the ER before they've gotten any medicines? Is it the worst heart rate that they had in the past 24 hours? Some scores want like the highest temperature for fevers or the lowest oxygen level. Some just want the most recent one. So even when you think of something as straightforward as like, what's the patient's blood pressure? Well, how did that score derive that?
Right. Where did it pull that data from, right? And
Exactly.
how accurate is that in the context of the goal that you're trying to achieve, the measurement you're trying to measure for the outcome you're trying to solve, right?
Right. And more recently, the papers and the scores tend to explain that in fine detail.
Mhm.
But prior to that, when they weren't expecting anybody to like think to that level, like of that degree of specificity,
Mhm.
because they weren't expecting their tool to be digitized.
Right.
It's not uncommon that we have to like email authors and say, hey, what did you mean by pulse ox? Because was that the triage? Was that the worst? Was it the best? Because they must have some sense of it since they process their own data, but
Right.
it's often not spelled out in the paper specifically what they mean by honestly like any value.
Gotcha. So you're saying maybe clinicians, let's say older clinicians, is that right? What right way of
Well, no,
putting it?
just older research papers.
Older
Just
research
papers.
papers.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
just older research papers, data that came out in the 2000s or something like that. They probably didn't specify what they mean by altered mental status, for example.
Yeah, they can mean a lot of different things. But
Yeah,
and so you're saying that you having to go back and ask for more context around what it is, what kind of value, where are they deriving this value from, and in what
exactly.
context, right, that they meant it in. Yeah,
Yep.
no, that's super important. And I think that's very important as we, like looking at things like, AI and just in general, digitization of health data, understanding. And this is why I think I think we've talked about this before, like we need clinicians at the forefront of this data translation, especially in, obviously if it's healthcare related, because clinicians can give that context or ask the right questions to find out, oh yeah, where is this data being pulled from? Why do we need this data? How are we going to use this? Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's garbage in, garbage out, certainly. If you have poor quality data, you're not going to be able to, or actually, one of the problems is AI probably could make jump to some conclusions based on poor quality data, but then that data probably would not be applicable to other people. And then, yeah, you absolutely need somebody that understands medicine or pharmacy or nursing. You need somebody that understands that to be able to interpret the data. One example, people who are pregnant often will have a slight elevation in their white blood cell count. Now that is normal in pregnancy, normal. But if you were to just take the absolute cutoff of, the white blood cell count in an adult should be no greater than 11, for example, you could very easily have an entirely skewed data sample if you either didn't take that into account or you didn't exclude those patients or, whatever it is.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So understanding where the cutoff points should or shouldn't be.
Like, is this normal for this condition?
Is this normal for this condition? Right. So with that, I definitely wanted to go back to your journey through MDCalc though, because
sure,
I think a lot of people are interested, like some of our viewers might be really interested in, building out their own product or building their own software or their own app, maybe whatever it is, or just building their own podcast, just like this, right? Like like based on that, when you were growing it by yourself in those first initial stages, I think it was what you said, 6 years, 2005, 2011, right?
Yeah.
What were there any like key lessons or failures that you learned the most from?
Good question. I think, certainly for kind of digital tools, certainly platform stability is important. Especially when you're building something by yourself, it is extremely stressful when your website goes down or something like that. Right. Especially, the 3 years I was like half the time I had been building it, I was in emergency medicine residency. So I was working, long hours, long days, and then I'd get some email or text from a friend that says, hey, it looks like MDCalc is down. And I'm like, oh gosh. I'm about to go into a shift, or I just finished a 12-hour shift. I'm exhausted. Like, this is the last thing I want to do.
How did you push through that?
I just lots of anxiety and palpitations, and like, again, the good thing I'm an introvert. Like I'd be like, okay, well, I guess I need to fix this because I really do feel like we have a responsibility to keep this tool available because so many people use it. Like it's kind of, I kind of joke, it's like the Kleenex of facial tissue. People know now, well, the way I solve this particular problem is, I just go to MDCalc to do it. So we definitely have a responsibility to like maintain this tool for people. That certainly was one of the most challenging things. And then, healthcare IT can be much slower to adapt than other industries. So just one example, we had to support Internet Explorer 6, which is a very ancient web browser.
Oh yeah.
But that was, in, I think maybe in like 2013 or 2014, maybe 1% or less of the world's internet usage was Internet Explorer 6. But on our site, which was pretty much exclusively going to be used by, clinicians. It's not, no patient or normal non-medical person is going to go to MDCalc. We had still like 10% of our users were on Internet Explorer 6, which was extremely buggy. It had all these code problems. Again, a lot of the browser standards now have made that a non-issue, but the fact that we still had to support this ancient code was a huge challenge because it meant we couldn't move forward with better code or faster code or anything like that.
So you're reliant on this other platform that was just not letting you move as fast as you wanted to go.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And that's because healthcare IT tends to be a little bit slower to adapt, much more conservative, much slower to try something new, just like all of medicine, tends to be that way. Doctors tend to do the same thing that they, if they learned how to manage X a certain way in residency, they'll tend to manage it that way for a really long time. And it takes a long time for them to change their practice. And, I think a lot of people are critical of doctors for that reason. But the reason that we behave that way is because we know or feel that, hey, I know this way works. I know this drug works. I know its side effects. I know I can manage them appropriately and it's safe. And so that's why medicine tends to be slow to change, is because we literally have people's lives at stake. And we want to do things. We want to do things in a way that's safe and tried and true. An attending once told me this phrase that I will never forget. He said, "You never want to be the first person to prescribe a medicine, but you also never want to be the last person."
Very interesting. Yeah. This is something that was echoed throughout my rotations and through pharmacy school. And it was the fact that there's a reason they echoed the phrase evidence-based guidelines, evidence-based medicine, because we're hesitant as clinicians to, and especially pharmacists, right? Because a lot of the essence of our profession is to be risk averse completely, because we're the last step, we're the safeguard, we're the one, like double checking, verification, risk mitigation, right? But we're reliant on the proposition that everything we do is evidence-based, so that we're not harming the patient, so that we're not taking on unnecessary risk, an unnecessary amount of risk. But of course, in medicine, I think that's why I appreciate physicians, because sometimes physicians they shoulder a lot of the burden in terms of taking the necessary amount of risk when it comes to like a new medication, right? But maybe not being the first, but
sure.
Right. But definitely taking that risk, and then with that being complementary to pharmacists. But yeah, I agree with you, everything you just said.
Well, it's like every drug that I have, in my 20-ish, I guess I started med school in 2003. In my 20 years in my medical career, every medicine that we've ever seen always has, nothing, there's no magic pill. There's nothing that is risk-free. And so, we're always just trying to balance those risks and benefits. Ozempic is really popular. All of those medicines are extremely popular. And for people with severe diabetes and everything like that, there certainly are huge benefits to weight loss, which helps get somebody's hemoglobin A1C down, which drastically reduces their risk of lots of really terrible things.
Long-term complications.
But for someone who is 20 pounds overweight or heavier than they would like to be and are taking Ozempic, the risk benefit ratio is much less clear in that person. We don't know, and your listeners, I'm sure, know this, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, but we just don't know what the long-term side effects of those medicines are, just like we didn't know the long-term side effects of the COVID vaccines, but that the data that we saw in the state of a crisis of a pandemic, we thought, yeah, this is a reasonable medicine and vaccine to give. So we're just always trying to find that right balance of risk and benefit, and based on any individual person, they're going to have different risks and different thresholds of benefit. It's kind of that art of medicine piece.
I agree, because it's so interesting, because how we view risk benefit, how we evaluate data or perception of what we view as acceptable and not acceptable is, I think, so different from what the normal person sees as acceptable, or how much risk they want to take on versus the potential benefit. Because we, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we view how we perceive data and clinical trials through that paradigm of like seeing evidence-based medicine, seeing, what is it called? Was it controlled studies?
Sure.
Yeah.
Randomized,
double-blind, randomized, placebo.
Yeah.
Controlled studies. Right. And so we see things through that lens. And if it's not that, up to that standard, we almost look down upon that data, which is fair, because as it should be, it should be heavily scrutinized. It should be, because we should be looking for the best evidence possible. But then how the general public, the layperson, may view things is, oh, well, this my friend told me they took it and they're fine.
Yeah.
If I take it, I should be okay, right? Or something like that.
I mean, right? I think that's why we need, obviously, informed consent. And I try to practice as much what we call shared decision making as I can in my practice. It just kind of means, hey, informing the patient of the risks and benefits and alternatives, and they help. Together we come up with a plan of what would be an appropriate amount of risk or benefit for that particular patient. Some people want to live as many days on this earth as possible. Other people want to focus on high quality days of life. And so those are just very different perspectives about what types of things someone is interested in, either having a disease managed or not managed, in different ways. I think sometimes we in the medical field are overly conservative. And they've done some studies. Chest pain is a frequent reason for ER visits. And they've done some studies, and we've got some scores that are on MDCalc and other places that help you decide how risky someone with chest pain is. Like, what are the odds that this person, after I do some tests, that this person still has a risk of, say, having a heart attack or something like that.
Right.
And when they've surveyed doctors and patients, most patients think, oh my God, I'm having chest pain. I'm making this up, but I have oh my God, I have an 80% chance that this is a heart attack. Versus, you talk to the doctor and the doctor's like, yeah, maybe 5%. And 5% is so high that I need to work them up. I need to do more tests. I need to do a stress test, whatever. But then if you tell the patient, hey, we've studied this. Our best assessment is that your risk of this being a heart attack is 5%. And they're like, oh, 5%? Great. I'd love to go home now. Versus the doctor's like, 5% is way too high. We need to get them down to less than 2%. So, that it's a perfect example of what you just said.
Yes. The
medical understanding of risk and the patient understanding of risk are sometimes extremely different. And if you actually just tell the patient what you're thinking, hey, this doesn't really sound like a heart attack. We'll do some tests. I think it's going to be fine. I think after those tests, your risk is probably 3%. It's a heart attack. They're like, oh, great. 97 times out of 100, it's not a heart attack. Wonderful. I'd love to go home after that. But then occasionally you have a patient that will say 3%, that sounds really high. Or, or it's in the context of their life.
It could be dependent on the disease state that they have. It could, cancer versus like just chest pain or something like that.
Totally.
Right?
Or, or like, oh my gosh, my best friend just had a heart attack. I understand you're seeing 3%, but last week 3% would have been low to them. And then after their friend had a heart attack, now they're thinking 3% still high. So that's why it's so important that, you try to understand the patient, which is a challenge certainly in the ER, where we're trying to kind of move quickly and
Of course. Right.
do things efficiently.
Yeah, do things efficiently. Just going off of that though, because it's super interesting that in like we see the risk so differently based on our paradigm shifts. How important, because you said that a lot of it has to do with, we have to communicate why we view the way the data why we view the data the way we do. How important is it for clinicians to have that good communication skills or that EQ, that emotional intelligence, in order to be able to explain to a patient or explain to other clinicians XYZ? How, just in general, how important is it to have communication skills and EQ in medicine? Or maybe
Oh,
just
I
in
mean,
profession?
I think it's critical. I mean, the fact that I think the MCAT now has kind of more writing and reading sections, I don't know, it's been a long time since I took the MCAT, but a larger emphasis on like kind of understanding the human side of medicine makes all the difference. Just like I mentioned, you have to be able to explain things clearly. In the ER, you need to immediately try to gain the rapport of the patient and get them to trust you, because I fully appreciate that I'm like a random stranger to these people,
Right.
and they are immediately, sometimes putting their lives in my hands.
They're in distress, right?
Totally. I mean, a lot of people say I'm in the ER. You meet people on like literally the worst day they've ever had in their lives.
Right.
Especially for like a young person that has never had any medical issues, and they're having severe pain because all they know is they've got severe pain here. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's a kidney stone. To me, no big deal. I see kidney stones every day, every freaking day. But for them, this is the worst they've ever felt in their life. So being able to talk with them, gain their trust, can certainly be a challenge.
What techniques do you have for doing that? Like being able to not talk down, but talk to a patient's level. Like, do you have anything for that?
Yes, I try not to talk down. You have to be able to, it is definitely EQ. Like, it's definitely the ability to read a person, and it's all body language. It's almost entirely nonverbal. It's like the tiniest little facial expressions. It's to understand how your personality is going to mesh well or not mesh well with them. Like I tend to be, I tend to be a pretty sarcastic person. I think most ER doctors are pretty sarcastic and a little cynical,
a little jaded.
Yeah, and I tend to try to use humor, my humor as well, to try to kind of calm patients and make them feel a little bit more at ease by kind of joking. But if I tell a joke and it lands flat, I immediately know, okay, no more jokes with this person. Joking to them makes them feel like I'm not taking their concern seriously.
Yeah.
So, if I come in and I'm like maybe very friendly, and friendly to the point that maybe I'm not presenting myself as like a very formal, I am the doctor.
Right.
You are the patient.
Like taking the gravity of the situation seriously.
Yeah. Sometimes I can get a sense, you can get a sense very quickly if a more casual style is going to make the patient feel reassured, and when a more casual style is going to make them very upset and lose trust in you. So then you really quickly have to change the way that you interact with them. I'll give an example. Patients tend to think that IV antibiotics work better than oral antibiotics.
Interesting. Yeah.
If you've gotten that.
No,
I mean,
for sure.
they tend to,
because
like a lot of patients, even though the data suggests that for most conditions, IV antibiotics are not better than oral antibiotics, but often in the ER, patients tend to want a dose of IV antibiotics because they think it's going to fix them faster or better, or
Yeah, they think it's stronger. They think it'll work more efficiently because it's going right into your bloodstream. Yeah,
right into your body. Yeah,
yeah.
Even if you try to argue with them or educate them about like bioavailability, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Don't do it.
It's just so foreign. This is a concept so
especially
foreign.
in the ER. Yeah. So I had a guy recently that had a pretty big abscess. I see a lot of abscesses. I'm in 15 years in the ER. And I was like, oh, God, it's pretty bad. And so like, I kind of said to him, like, because I was pretty worried that it was going to get worse before it was going to get better. I said, hey, you know, I'm thinking you'll still be able to go home. What I'd like to do is give you some IV antibiotics, because I actually kind of was worried that this could like get a lot worse pretty quickly, like even maybe to the point that maybe they needed to stay in the hospital. So I'll give you some IV antibiotics. We're going to do a couple of blood tests and some imaging just to take a look at this thing. And he like, normally patients love that. Oh yeah, definitely. Give me that. Give me the test.
Yeah.
And he just had like the littlest, like slight look of disappointment in his face or something like that. I was trying to read that, and I said, oh, I'm getting the sense that you're not super interested in the IV antibiotics. When I mentioned that, you kind of reacted. And he said, oh yeah, I have a wedding to go to in a couple of hours. So I was hoping to like get out of here. So I said, oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, so again, shared decision-making, right? His values are, he needs to get to a wedding. I think maybe he was even in the wedding party or something. I don't know exactly. And so I said, okay, well, here's what we'll do instead. We'll do this one kind of rapid blood test that we can do at the bedside. And then we will see, you know, I'll give you some oral antibiotics. And since normally we would do a couple other tests, here are the things that I need you to look out for. You know, if this were to happen, if you were to get a fever, you really absolutely need to get to the ER and get a further evaluation, because I'm worried this is going to get bigger and get worse. Blah, blah, blah. So
communicating what you are prioritizing, what you are concerned about versus what he's concerned. He voiced his concern. Oh, I have a wedding to go to, versus you're saying, okay, if that's your priority, okay. But if we're going to prescribe this, you got to look out for X, Y, and Z, because this is still what we're concerned about. Right. So being able to have that two-way street, two-way communication of what both parties are most concerned about.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. He didn't even voice it. He just reacted, had this little like, oh, the doctor wants to give me antibiotics. And so you have to be able to like read people and pick up on that and be like, because had I just said, okay, we're going to do IV antibiotics, labs and imaging, and then I walked away, he would have been, people react differently. He might have either been upset with me, or he would have told the nurse, oh, I don't want to actually do that, because people tend to not want to upset the doctor, but they'll tell the nurse how they're actually feeling. People want to please doctors, which can be, very good and very bad sometimes. And so you just have to be able to read people and then work with them, right? Had I really thought that like he was going to die, obviously I would have just said, I really don't think you can leave. Here are all the reasons I'm really worried about you. But I was like, yeah, I'd love to do more tests. You got a wedding to go to. I'm going to go ahead and start this immediately. Here are the things you need to look out for. I mean, we say in the ER, like, it's a free country. I can't force people to do things. I can only, you really can only use your sphere of influence to educate them and say, hey, here's what I'm worried about. Here's what I'm thinking we should do. But, sometimes people have different priorities. And you also like gain a little bit of fatalism. It's like, I only have so much ability to control the situation. People are going to do what they're going to do. While they're under my care, I can do everything I can to help them. But, if somebody is I counsel them and say, gosh, I really think you should stop smoking. And we try to motivate them, and I get them all the nicotine patches and the gum and get them follow-up and all these other things. They might go back out and start smoking again. And you have to, especially in the ER, you have to be like, I'm going to do my best, but my interaction with this human, because I'm not somebody's primary care doctor, my interaction with most of my patients is once in their lifetime for a few hours, tops.
Yeah.
That's literally all my interaction is with them forever.
Ever.
So you have to appreciate that you can't control people. People have free will to do what they want. You can just try to explain your concerns and treat them with respect and hope that they listen, and hope that maybe this time they're not going to stop smoking. But if enough doctors tell them enough times, eventually they'll be interested in stopping smoking, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Or find the self-motivation to do it, right? Because I think you're touching on a topic that I think is very near and dear to my heart. like patient behavior change, right? Like
Sure.
it's super hard, especially in the context that you gave it, where you're an emergency medicine physician, you see them only once in their lifetime, essentially for a
Yeah.
few hours. How much, if you think about it objectively, like there's not much you can really do. And I'm assuming that was a learning curve for you to accept
Oh, yeah.
how little impact you can make in terms of the longevity of that interaction, right? And how much patient behavior change you can actually have. Whereas you feel like you're just fixing that momentary calamity in that moment, right?
I mean, I think that's where at least some of the cynicism of emergency medicine comes from,
Yeah.
is you train to try to help people, and you certainly do your best, and then at some point people make decisions that you don't agree with, because and you have to accept that people have maybe different value systems. They have different priorities in their life than just their health. Sure, their health is a priority, but it's not the only one to them. And it can be really hard when especially when a patient's making a decision that you think is a really, really, really bad decision. But you need to respect them to make it, and you need to encourage them if they change their mind, make them feel welcome, that they can come back. Hey, if your chest pain gets worse, I know you don't want to stay in the hospital. I'm really worried about you. But promise me that if you start feeling worse or have other symptoms, you'll come back, or at least you'll think about coming back. You call family members and say, I'm really worried about this person. If they, if they're not feeling better, you've got to convince them to come back. So yeah, it can definitely be a challenge.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I know an ER doctor, not at my current job, but from years ago, who actually would use a little bit of reverse psychology. So he would
How so?
he would tell smokers, oh, you're not interested in smoking? Wonderful. I'll see you here next week. Like being a little bit in their face, which again can certainly backfire, but just say great, you're gonna keep me employed because you're gonna be back with your COPD again or something like that. But I mean, I'd love you to stop smoking, but if you don't want to stop,
I can't stop you. Yeah.
Job security.
And how would patients respond to that?
I mean, usually I think he would intentionally do it because it is so unexpected for a doctor to talk to someone that way.
Like the shock value?
I think he would do it to try to interrupt the brain circuits of, oh, the doctor's just going to tell me to stop smoking again. And sometimes especially with teenagers, that approach does work a little bit well, because the teenage brains are not fully developed. And so if you can say things in a little bit of shock value, sometimes it can short circuit their brains and then maybe encourage them to make, better decisions.
I often think, and I use this approach in general because I mentor a lot of younger folks, especially with scouting and stuff like that, the hobbies that I have on the side, or just in pharmacy school or in undergrad, things like that, and speakership events that I've been going to. A lot of it, I think, based on what you just said, the brain hasn't fully developed yet. The prefrontal cortex hasn't fully developed. Like they haven't developed that neuronal pathway. I remember, when I was 17, 18, 19, through 22, 25, even maybe a little bit now, right? Like our neuronal pathways, some of them just haven't been opened to intake that kind of information and perceive it in that manner. For instance, a doctor, you assume that a doctor is going to tell you, yeah, quit smoking. You so assume it. And then for them to come up and say, hey, yeah, cool, you don't want to stop smoking? Fine, I'll keep my job. It's just it just opens up a different pathway in their brain. Like, oh, wow, I am keeping this guy employed. Like, maybe I should start regularly.
It's no skin off my back. I'll see you here next week.
Yeah. With that, let's try to pivot, because I want to make sure we hit certain topics. I think.
Sure.
Anything else going on with regards to how MDCalc in relation to what you're seeing with ChatGPT, AI, how quickly it's moving? I'm sure you're watching that very closely.
Yeah.
And then its implications. I'm sure you're following some people in the space. The implications for healthcare. For instance, I've used it personally for not in actual practice setting, but just to see if it could counsel me on the difference between lovastatin, torvastatin, things like that. What are your thoughts on that? Any hot takes? Overrated, underrated?
Plenty of hot takes. Hot take number one, I think it will make healthcare move a little bit faster in terms of kind of technology adoption, but still not nearly as fast as kind of any other industry, because healthcare is so highly regulated and so, like we talked about, so kind of conservative and slow to change. Hot take number two, I think it is still, I shouldn't say not safe to use with patients, but there are just based on the way that it works in terms of like, you know, probabilistic, you know, it has the probability that the best next word is the word speaker is 99.7%. So I'm going to type the word speaker next. It just means that, you know, it could occasionally give a patient the wrong information, especially because it doesn't know right from wrong very well, is a big concern. And I do think that, you know, there's tons of interest in healthcare in it for very good reason, but some hospital system, some doctor will end up using it with a patient, and that patient will have a bad outcome, and that will then drastically close down the interest in it for a really long time.
I agree, because public perception right now is so important for such a developing technology, right?
Yeah, and I just saw a Pew Research thing that said, you know, 60% of patients would not want AI to kind of run their medical care. And so, you know, I think some hospitals or some doctors will start using it a little too aggressively. Someone will have a bad outcome, and then there will be a drastic, not shutdown, but a drastic kind of like quasi-moratorium on it for patient level stuff for quite a while. I mean, if you even look at OpenAI's stuff, I've typed in a couple prompts just to see what it would do, and occasionally it has said that my prompt may violate their terms of service because it had some like medical stuff in there. I think I had it say something. I said, and to be very clear, this was not a real patient. I was just intentionally saying it was a real patient. I said, I have a patient in the ER with, with like necrotizing fasciitis. What would be the best next steps? And it told me the next steps, but it actually deleted my prompt and said, your prompt may be a violation of our terms of service. And because they added some terms that talk about using it for patient care,
like PHI and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's fine if you say, what would be the management of necrotizing fasciitis? But I think what it didn't like was I said, I have a patient with, because then it's like, it appropriately assumes you're using it with a patient, which again, I did not.
Right.
But I think it is really good at, I had a patient with a hyphema, which is blood in their anterior chamber of their eyeball from some trauma. And I had the ophthalmologist see the patient, and the ophthalmologist gave me some recommendations. And so I asked ChatGPT, I was just curious, what would be the recommendations for a patient with a hyphema? And it literally gave me the exact same recommendations as the ophthalmologist gave. Obviously, the ophthalmologist had a little bit more detail because she knew the patient's medical problems in the context, but it explained them. It probably honestly explained them better than the ophthalmologist did, just because it was able to explain them at a patient level, right? That was, the ophthalmologist said, you know, head of bed to 45 degrees, no nose blowing, avoid NSAIDs. And then of course, as the ER doctor, I then translated that into patient language, like, oh, you should sleep with some pillows propped up, and you should avoid medicines like aspirin and Motrin and Aleve and ibuprofen and an alcohol, right? So, but ChatGPT was able to do that translation without having to have the step of turning it into patient language. So.
I think that's a perfect application of what ChatGPT can do to help augment the way we give care. That's a perfect. I think it's a good use case where you already know what you want to say, but now you have to translate it down to a patient's health reading level or there's a health literacy.
Yeah,
right?
you can say, you know, explain the explain the discharge recommendations for a patient with a high FEMA at a fourth grade reading level.
Yeah, and
Or
it'll do it.
I had it explain the Fontan procedure, which you may not know about. It's a procedure used for pediatric congenital heart disease.
Okay.
And so I said, explain the Fontan procedure to a 5-year-old. And it was able to, it said, the heart is a very special organ and that gives oxygen to your whole body. And we're going to do a procedure that helps make your heart pump better. I mean, it was, it's just really incredible.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it was your second point. I wanted to really add in a good point about it, but second point about how ChatGPT and AI, it's only, based on, we were in Clubhouse for a while. If anybody doesn't know what Clubhouse is, audio-based platform that had just a bunch of really, really smart people and people at the top of their field on it. That's where me and met. That's where we met. And we were in these rooms together. And AI at that time, 2 years ago, was the topic of choice for many of these med tech rooms, medical technology rooms, health technology rooms, digital health rooms. The one key theme that I always heard over and over was AI in any capacity will only be as good as the data you feed it, right?
Yeah.
It'll only push out the outcomes you want based on the input that you feed it. Output equals input, or vice versa. So I agree. So, but that also just begs the question: at what point will we be able to feed it such good data that'll potentially create, a certain level of outcomes desired?
Automatic general intelligence.
Right. So that, it just begs a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But of course, I think right now it's still building that. Although, the new version of GPT, GPT-4, I believe is the one that just came out. It's now able to pass what is it? Well, for sure. I would assume
Every test
essentially, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Every test, medical licensing exams, which is, what is it called again? It's the USMLE, right?
Yeah.
And then the MCAT. It's
the bar,
the bar exam,
LSAT. Yeah.
LSAT.
Things are moving rapidly. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but
sure.
There's a couple open source platforms that now have came out last week. One's called Baby AGI, and another one's called Auto GPT.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, what they do is they have multiple GPT agents solving tasks and prioritizing tasks sequentially. Mm-hmm. So instead of a human having to say, give me a list of topics to ask Graham Walker, emergency doctor, it now says, I want to make you can now give it just a broader task. I want to make a podcast about pharmacy and entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. How would I go about doing that? And from there, it will then recursively come up with all the tasks that you would need. Oh, well, I need an account. I need a name for the podcast. Okay, how would I come up with a name for a podcast? So it can, it now is able to prioritize and remember all of the tasks required, just like a human would do, right? When you came up with this podcast, you had to, I need a microphone. Okay, what platform will I use to record it on? So people are starting to think that and this is open source on GitHub.
Right, on GitHub, right.
People are starting to think that the ability for the GPT to remember and to prioritize tasks and sequentially complete tasks is kind of heading rapidly toward general intelligence, which
I will have to check
singularity that out. And then humanity's done.
Oh gosh, and what was it? The Terminator? What is it? What is that? The motherboard called?
Yeah, Cyberdyne Systems.
Cyberdyne Systems. Yeah. Oof. But no, it's super interesting. I'll have to check that out because, as an Eagle Scout, and from scouting, I that's where I essentially learned my core project management skills in terms of managing projects, understanding deadlines, tasks to be done, prioritization of them. That sounds like essentially taking over a lot of project management skills, which is a very needed skill in general for a lot of industries. I would say also in healthcare. But man, that sounds like it's automating project management across.
It's a little, you get similar kind of goosebumps of wow, this is really incredible, and also, wow, this could be really scary. If you just give it a task of take over the world. And then, okay, well, what task would I need to take over the world? And then it just starts
Just spitting out like.
and now it's learning to run its own code, which, if you understand programming, it's one thing to write code. It's another thing to be able to execute that code. So you can imagine if it can now run code that it writes itself, the possibilities are endless. And I want to think of the Star Trek outcome of humanity is great, and we have all this new knowledge, and we can, have a Pax Humana. And then, then there's the Terminator ending that
it can go one of two ways.
One of two ways, yeah.
Or maybe there's a happy medium in between. Maybe,
That's right.
maybe we'll be friends with cybernet.
Yeah, besties.
With that, I don't know how much time we have left, but I definitely want to hit a couple more questions to pose to you. For anybody let's just start with this one. For anybody that's looking to do either medicine, emergency medicine, whether they're a pharmacist, nurse, a respiratory therapist, whatever it is, residency, what advice do you have for students, incoming students, anybody that's just looking to do something along the lines of what you do in emergency medicine?
You mean generally, or like with entrepreneurship?
No, well, that's a separate question. So specifically, just general advice for anybody that's interested in medicine and what you've done. Yeah.
I would say, the advice that I think is still true that I got is, think about other careers that you entertain other careers in your head, because medicine is not an easy road, and it's also not super simple to be a physician, especially, going through COVID and everything. I think and hope that means that more people will be entering medicine for the right reasons. And already most people are in medicine for the right reasons. If you go into medicine thinking that you're going to easily make a ton of money and have an easy job and have a hero complex, it's not going to work out well for you. Medicine is very humbling. And, it's not like another job where you clock in and clock out, and then you're able to just stop thinking about work. Myself included, I think most physicians kind of have a little bit of like their self-identity is entwined with being a physician, myself included. I can't not think of myself that way. Yeah. And so, there's a lot easier ways to make a lot of money. There are a lot other ways that you can have a profound impact on other humans in the world, whether be it in health or otherwise, and to have positive impacts on others. I really found that I really enjoyed the mixture of the science and the hard skills of more objective science and dosages reasoning and physiology, and which again, physiology is not as hard as something like physics or chemistry, as hard science, but like those kind of harder sciences mixed with kind of the softer, subjective, fuzzier stuff of communication and innovation and having to be more flexible and creative. Yeah.
Gotcha. No, great advice. What skills are you finding in a 2023 and changing environment in healthcare or just in society in general? What, from your perspective, are some of the needed skills in the upcoming generation of doctors, residents, of pharmacists, nurses, whoever it is? What are you seeing?
I mean, definitely more people with an interest and a focus on informatics. So being able to understand the data, and like we talked about earlier, someone that has the clinical experience to be able to process and put the data in context, but then understand how the data is going to be used and used effectively. Most, right now, most people that work in healthcare have a general understanding of the EHR, but we'll need more and more people that understand the data so that we can build systems that are able to process that data and make everybody's lives better, patients' lives better, easier work for doctors, things like that.
Absolutely.
So I think definitely more interest in informatics and computer science. And then, I think the other piece is that we're seeing today is the the aging of America and the kind of graying of America is here. It's kind of like climate change. We used to think of it as this like, oh, it's coming, but it's far off. It's far off, like when I grew up, I remember hearing about climate change, but it was just in Hollywood movies.
Right.
And now we see it every day.
The effect.
I mean, just the amount of rain, all the tornadoes that happened last week, all of the massive changes to the climate are here. And similarly, all of the changes of an aging population and the kind of like the aging boomers, baby boomers are here. Boomers sounds very derogatory. The baby boomer generation is here. And those patients are older and they need a lot more tests and workup to figure out what's wrong with them.
I was thinking personalized care, but yeah, that too. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we need people that are able to be creative about it, because we're going to need creative solutions, because we're going to have fewer young people and fewer working age people to take care of this inverted triangle of like a ton of old people.
Exactly. And then, the fact that we're having such a, the talks in general about the large PCP, primary care physician shortage, right? Or just shortage of physicians in general. And then we're already seeing the after effects of COVID and the burnout that has happened that's echoed throughout the healthcare industry, where we have nurses striking or just leaving the profession completely. And nurses are the backbone of healthcare. They deliver a lot of the services that we as the doctors, as pharmacists and clinicians do. And just physicians in general find, as we were talking about before the podcast, a lot of physicians finding more fulfillment doing things part-time or finding startups to do. And so there's just a large exodus across the industry of clinicians. And how do we create solutions that can kind of bridge that gap, like still fill in the gap for necessary care to enable our patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the regulations in healthcare are due for updating, I will say. A lot of the laws that still impact the way that healthcare works, whether it is the HIPAA law from 1996, which, still one of the reasons that every clinic and every hospital still has a fax machine, and the fact that fax machines still exist is probably due to healthcare. That needs to be massively updated. It's 30 years old and has ignored all of the internet technology we have. And then like the law that regulates us in the emergency department, called EMTALA, was created in 1986 and has been certainly a boon for emergency medicine and a boon for many emergency patients, but could certainly use a refresher on kind of living in a digital world. I mean, were you even born in 1986?
I was born in 1996. I was born in 1996.
No, 86.
Oh, 86. Oh gosh, no. I was born in 96.
Yeah, I was 6 years old. But just imagine this law that dictates how emergency care can and cannot be provided has not been touched in 35 years, something like that.
That's just a lot of
phone, pre-internet, all this stuff. So.
Which just sounds like from the dinosaur age. Because we've moved so quickly as a society in terms of
everywhere
adoption,
else except
healthcare. We're still using fax. Like that's such a dinosaur age kind of thing.
Yeah.
Especially, no, trust me, like pharmacists, we're still faxing prescriptions, the doctors and between different pharmacies. Yeah, no, I agree. We need a massive overhaul. But I think it requires a combination of a lot of different professions to come together to come to the table and policy change. But that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
So based on that, what would you say to anybody, or maybe to yourself, maybe to your younger self? What would you say to someone who, has entrepreneurial or creative tendencies, but they're also, in healthcare and, maybe they don't want a standard career. They don't want to just be just an emergency medicine physician or just a pharmacist or something like that. What would you say to someone that has this thinking in their head where they want to do something a little bit different?
I would say there are thousands of problems to fix in healthcare. I'm sure they see them every day, and a lot of them are fixable. Some are less fixable because they, are regulatory and to some degree out of your control.
It's complex.
except, you could imagine some people are passionate about changing regulations. And so maybe they start a nonprofit that tries to lobby, Congress about MDCalc or HIPAA, whatever. But I think there are so many problems. I would say find one that is within your ability to change. So whether that means you are on a committee in your hospital that's able to add fewer clicks to the EHR, or, fix an alert that shouldn't be there, to, make an app that helps calculate scores for free or whatever. I think there are so many problems that we need more people trying to fix them, for sure, while we're still trying to deliver care in a really broken system. I guess the other thing I would say is, just because of the way that healthcare is funded and works in the United States, it tends to work best if your product is kind of like freely available. And like, that's one of the reasons we've kept MDCalc free, is I think it would be not used nearly as much as if people had to pay for it. Even if they had to pay a nominal $1 a year fee, people would just go elsewhere or wouldn't use the score. So I think if you want to solve things, you need to find a way to put the tools in the hands of the people using the tools, which sometimes is really easy and sometimes it's really hard.
Absolutely. And so just going off of that, like creating a great product, not necessarily asking for money up front, but just creating a great product that puts in mind the users first and solving their problems. And from there, there you get your widespread adoption, if it is that great of a tool, right?
Totally. No, I mean, doctors are constantly, and I would say probably the same with nurses and pharmacists, and
absolutely,
social workers and psychologists, everybody. If you build the tool that truly solves an issue or a big frustration or pain point, people will just immediately start using it.
And just talking about it.
That's certainly been my experience. Yeah, I mean, we have spent $0 advertising or marketing MDCalc, $0. And we're used by, we think, probably about 2/3 of physicians in the US every single month. And that's not to mention pharmacists and nurses and NPs and PAs and everybody else. So if you truly solve a problem, you will immediately have a user base. Immediately.
I agree. Yeah. And just based on that, like you were talking earlier in the podcast about how MDCalc is kind of known as its own thing now. Like when people think of a tool, they don't say, oh, let's use a tool to calculate this. They think, oh, let's use MDCalc to calculate this.
Yeah.
Kind of the same way that people talk about like Apple, like, oh, let's use my smartphone to call or to go on social media. No, they say, let's use my iPhone. It's just essentially replace the word smartphone, right? In terms of that, because the brand is so powerful. And the reason the brand is so powerful for MDCalc now is because you just built a great product that put in mind the user's problems first. It's very user friendly. It solves the problem in the way that it should be solved. Yeah,
that's the goal.
Yep, 100%. All right, last question, I think.
Okay.
Last question here. Big question. It's gonna be kind of deep.
Okay, hit me.
How do you want to be remembered?
Ooh, that is deep. I mean, Norman, I'm in my 40s, so midlife crisis is a thing. You're too young, but you'll have one too. I don't want to be remembered. I think MDCalc is certainly one, like, part of my legacy of, building tools that just kind of solve problems. I think I'm really good at helping doctors get shit done, like building tools that make it easier, that fit into their workflows. So yeah, I think I'd like to be remembered as a emergency doctor that tried to take good care of patients and at the same time also tried to kind of solve challenges in the medical world for a larger group of people, right? I love that duality of helping an individual, one person, but then also
a system,
addressing the system level challenges and fixing that.
You just see problems and you want to solve them. Yeah.
I love that. That's like my favorite thing to do. But easier said than done. I mean, let's not forget that change is extremely hard. It is hard for humans to adopt new technologies and new workflows and everything like that. But But that's part of the fun of trying to like figure out how to nudge people in the right direction.
Yeah, it gives you a sense of purpose in life, and it grounds you, and it gives you, and it helps you understand the importance of patience, like understanding it's going to be hard, the problem you want to solve, but it drives you. It still motivates you, like it's because it's a problem worth solving, right? If you adopt a problem that's worth solving, then the patient comes.
Then you
discipline
get
comes.
the internal drive to fix it. Yeah,
exactly. If it's a
you
problem,
don't need external forces telling you to solve it. Yeah,
I agree, and that's usually my advice for younger people, because I feel like I found that in terms of like the podcasting and bridging gaps and things like that. Like when you find a problem worth solving, and it makes you motivated to get up out of bed, go start your day or off on right, get right to work. It just motivates you more than any external factor can.
Yeah, totally.
All right, well, we're here towards the end of the podcast. Anything you'd like to plug?
No, I mean, if you don't know MDCalc, give it a try. We have it's free iPhone and Android app. If you're interested in EHR integration, go to ehr.mdcalc.com and you can see kind of all the features that we have. No, thanks for having me. It's been great to talk.
No, absolutely. Graham, it was just great to talk to you in because we haven't just like talked like this, other than Clubhouse in like 2 years. It's always great to talk to you because I feel like we see system levels problem solving in a similar vein.
Totally, Norman.
Thank you, Graham. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks, Norman.